Have you ever heard about the time the United States government dropped bombs on its own people? A war fought not on foreign soil against a foreign enemy, but deep in the rugged mountains of West Virginia against American citizens who mined the coal that powered the nation. Men who had spilled their sweat, their blood, and sometimes their lives underground simply so factories could run and cities could shine. This wasn't a rebellion of radicals or outsiders. These were working fathers and neighbors, many of them veterans who had fought for their country and returned home expecting dignity, not chains. Today, we will uncover a story buried under almost a century of silence. A story where average Americans armed themselves with rifles and determination to challenge one of the most powerful industries in the world, because they had nothing left to lose. For decades, coal companies controlled every corner of life in Appalachia. They owned the land, they owned the houses, they owned the law, and they owned the people. If you crossed them, you didn't just get fired. You could be beaten, thrown out into the cold, or shot dead by private armies. But these miners, poor in possessions yet rich in courage, decided to fight back. They tied red bandanas around their necks, forming a brotherhood that would be remembered as the original Rednecks. They marched toward a place called Blair Mountain, and their march would become the largest armed uprising on American soil since the Civil War. Why have we never been told this story in school? Why has this battle been censored, minimized, and erased? Who decided that Americans shouldn't learn about a moment when workers rose up against corporate power and nearly won? This is the story of the Battle of Blair Mountain, America's hidden class war. Welcome to a piece of history that powerful people hoped you'd never discover. To understand why thousands of miners eventually took up arms, we must go back to the late 1800s and early 1900s, when coal became the lifeblood of the United States. Everything ran on coal. Locomotives, battleships, steel mills, factories, and beneath the Appalachian Mountains lay some of the richest coal seams on Earth. But these riches didn't go to the people who dug them up. They went to coal barons, a handful of elites who built monopolies on land and labor. They established company towns, a system that has been described by historians as industrial feudalism. Workers were paid in scrip, a currency printed by the coal company, worthless everywhere except at the company store, where prices were outrageously inflated. Imagine working 12 hours a day in darkness, then going home with just enough to keep yourself in debt. Families lived in houses that could be taken away at a moment's notice. Protest meant eviction. Unionizing meant violence. Coal companies hired Baldwin Felts detectives, the infamous private enforcers who crushed unions with brute force. They patrolled the towns with high-powered rifles, smashed strikes, and terrorized families. They raided homes without warrants, arrested anyone they saw as a threat, and carried machine guns on armored train cars, nicknamed death cars. If the miners resisted, bullets answered them. Meanwhile, conditions underground were a nightmare. Poisonous gases, cave-ins, explosions that could wipe out entire crews. Hundreds died every year, leaving widows and orphans with no compensation and nowhere to go. Children as young as 8 worked in the coal breakers, inhaling dust that would shorten their lives. Black lung disease carved years off a miner's life. The coal companies claimed they brought prosperity to the mountains, but in truth, they extracted everything: the coal, the money, and even the humanity of the workers who risked their lives daily. But pressure can only build for so long before it erupts. On the horizon, flames of rebellion were starting to flicker. Rebellion needs a spark and a symbol, and in 1920, both arrived in a town called Matewan. Here, Sheriff Sid Hatfield, a young, tough coal miner's friend, refused to be bought by the coal companies. He believed the law should protect the people, not the corporations. When Baldwin Felt's agents arrived to evict union miners and their families, Hatfield stood in their way. He confronted the detectives on the street, telling them they had no legal authority. They answered with mockery and threats. Tension crackled through the air. Then, a shot rang out. Chaos exploded. In seconds, bullets tore through the town's square. Townspeople took up arms against the detectives. When the smoke cleared, several Baldwin Felt's agents lay dead, including the notorious leader Albert Felts. The miners celebrated, for the first time, someone had stood up to the coal bosses and won. Word of Hatfield's bravery spread like wildfire across the region. He became a hero, a living legend. Miners saw hope. Union membership surged. People believed change was finally coming. But the coal operators wanted revenge, not reform. On August 1st, 1921, Sid Hatfield and his deputy Ed Chambers walked up the courthouse steps in Welch, West Virginia, unarmed, to answer trumped-up charges. Suddenly, Baldwin Felt's agents surrounded them. With no warning, they gunned both men down in front of their wives. Crowds screamed as the assassins smiled, lit cigars, and walked away, free. Justice had been murdered alongside Hatfield. That moment transformed sorrow into rage. The miners realized that if they didn't fight now, they never would. Hatfield's death was the match that lit the fuse. Just weeks after Hatfield's assassination, the miners gathered, outraged and determined to force the release of imprisoned Unionists in Mingo County. They rallied under a young organizer named Bill Blizzard, a fiery leader who believed the miners' unity could topple oppression. Thousands came from miles away, trekking over mountains with little more than hunting rifles and their hope for justice. These men were not trained soldiers, or so it seemed, but many had served in the trenches of World War I. They carried the discipline and rage of veterans who returned home to find they were still fighting for basic rights. As they marched, the group swelled to more than 10,000, a people's army moving through the wilderness like a rising tide. They tied red bandanas around their necks so they could tell friend from foe in the thick forests. And a new identity was born, the Rednecks, a badge of honor that would later be twisted into a slur. The coal companies panicked. They paid Logan County Sheriff Don Chaffin, a ruthless enforcer loyal to the mine owners, to stop the miners by any means necessary. Chaffin raised an army of 2,000 armed guards, deputies, and hired guns. He built fortifications along the ridges of Blair Mountain, trenches, sandbag nests, and machine gun emplacements. He even acquired private planes to drop bombs and tear gas. The miners continued forward anyway, driven by the belief that their families' futures depended on this march. For them, freedom wasn't a dream. It was a debt owed. On August 25, 1921, with the line drawn and resolve hardened, gunfire cracked through the mountains. The Battle of Blair Mountain had begun. The fighting stretched across miles of dense forest. The mountains became a maze of ambushes, sniper nests, and trench assaults. The miners, using their knowledge of the terrain, pushed forward with surprising strategy. They communicated with signal flags, coordinated flanking maneuvers, and used dynamite to blast enemy positions. Many wore their army uniforms from World War I, a reminder that they once defended the nation, now turning against them. Chaffin's forces unleashed brutal firepower. Machine guns rained bullets from hilltops, snipers hid in trees, and then, in one of the darkest moments in U.S. labor history, planes took to the sky. Private pilots dropped homemade bombs filled with metal shards and gas onto the miners below. Think about that. Corporate-funded aircraft bombing American workers on American soil, simply for demanding the right to unionize. The miners pressed on for nearly a week, both sides suffering casualties. The hills echoed with gunshots day and night, families cowering in fear as the rebellion raged. Then, the U.S. government arrived. President Warren Harding sent in thousands of federal troops armed with rifles, artillery, and military aircraft. Many miners stopped in their tracks, seeing the uniforms they once fought beside overseas. They couldn't bring themselves to wage war against the nation they still believed in. Slowly, the firing ceased. The miners, realizing they were hopelessly outgunned, laid down their weapons and began the long walk home, not defeated in spirit, but overpowered by the sheer might of industry and government intertwined. The government wasted no time seeking vengeance. Nearly 1,000 miners were indicted on charges ranging from murder to treason. Courtrooms filled with workers in chains, men who had fought for the simple right to negotiate their wages. Many were convicted. Some spent years in prison. Union membership plummeted. Coal operators tightened their grip. The message was loud: resist and you will be crushed. And then history itself was weaponized. The Battle of Blair Mountain was scrubbed from textbooks. Newspapers downplayed or distorted what happened. Corporate propaganda reframed the miners as criminals, not heroes. For generations, people across the United States grew up never learning that the largest armed workers' rebellion in our history had ever occurred. Meanwhile, the coal companies continued extracting wealth, while Appalachia remained trapped in poverty that persists to this day. Yet the legacy of Blair Mountain refused to die. Through oral histories, families preserved the truth. In the 21st century, activists and descendants fought to protect the battlefield because coal corporations wanted to mine the very site where miners died. After years of legal battles, Blair Mountain was finally placed on the National Register of Historic Places, a victory that ensures the memory of those who stood up for justice will not be erased again. The Battle of Blair Mountain reminds us that freedom is often won from the bottom up, from the courage of ordinary people who refuse to submit to exploitation. It reminds us that democracy is not automatic. It must be defended, even against those who claim to protect it. Now that you know the truth about the Battle of Blair Mountain, ask yourself, why wasn't this story taught in school? Why is a moment where Americans united to demand their rights something powerful interests wanted buried? The miners may have lost the battle, but their sacrifice paved the way for future labor protections. Workplace safety laws, the right to organize, fairer wages, and more humane working conditions. They showed that when the working class stands together, they can shake the foundations of power. Their red bandanas became a symbol of solidarity that still resonates today. So the next time someone says, ordinary people can't change history, remember the miners who marched into the mountains and faced down armies to claim dignity. Their courage echoes through time and deserves to be remembered. Thank you for watching and learning a piece of American history that was almost lost. What did you think about today's video? Comment your thoughts and suggestions for my next video below.